Given everything we've discussed about macro in this conversation, what would you say is the best buy in markets today?
I mean, long term, probably Bitcoin. I think that anyone in traditional finance that has no Bitcoin position should have a Bitcoin position. Obviously, it doesn't have to be like all in, like degen, leverage long, but like not having any Bitcoin, I think is the easiest low hanging fruit to fix. Even if the thesis doesn't work out, if you got 3% and it's fine. But if it does do some of those really bullish outcomes, it's good to be on the right side of that, even with a small position. Um, and aside from that, I think there's like other assets out there that I think could do very well, but they all have counterparty risk. So, for example, I think that Chinese equities are super cheap right now. Nobody wants them. Um, and I'd say there's a high probability that 5 years from now, they've done very well from these low levels. But then there's some minority position where you literally just get zeroed out from owning them. Kind of like if Americans owned Russian stocks, a little over 2 years ago, those companies are still there, but your claim on those assets is basically just sanctioned away. So any investor has to take that into account. So I think that there are a lot of opportunities in equity around, but I would say that Bitcoin and Bitcoin Venture I mean, it's certainly where I'm focusing a lot of my time on.
Would you name any of the Bitcoin venture that you're invested in?
Well, so at Ego Death Capital, we have a public portfolio. So it's Lightning infrastructure, it's Bitcoin brokers around the world. It's we basically look into multiple different things. So anything that involves helping people buy it, helping people trade it, helping infrastructure for spending and things like that. So we have exposure to Fedi, which has a wallet that is more private and more distributed than we see from many other wallets. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. We tend to focus on the less speculative use cases, so less about like trading and leveraging for the most part, although, trading is still relevant, and it's more instead about kind of like long-term utility and long-term, kind of like the still basically the basics of the ecosystem.
Given everything we've talked about in macro thus far, what would you say is the worst buy in markets?
I mean, for example, I'm not bullish on Costco at 55 times earnings. It actually reminds me of, so in the late 90s, everyone, of course, is knows the dot-com bubble. But what they're less familiar with in many cases is if you look at like Coca-Cola stock, they were trading at like 50 times earnings, and Walmart was trading at like 50 times earnings. So a lot of these kind of blue chip consumer staples or consumer retail, that kind of thing, they were also trading at very high valuations. And over the next 10, 15 years, both Walmart and Coca-Cola continue to grow their earnings, their revenue, and all that, but their stock prices went like sideways for like 10 years. Because even as their earnings doubled, their earnings multiple, their price to earnings ratio got cut in half. They went from 50 to like 25 times earnings, which is back down to like reality. At some points, they even went lower, like Walmart went into the teens for a period of time. And so there's stocks like Costco, where it's just really hard to justify how this is going to perform long term. It doesn't mean it has to do bad next year or even the year after. It's already stayed this high longer than I would have guessed. But I would just say that there's investors have to be cautious about overpaying for something that's very good. Something can be great, and you can turn it into a bad investment if you buy it for like twice of what it's worth.
Be sure to click subscribe. We drop a video every single day keeping you informed about crypto.